You just have to figure out what you love, what you can be consistent with and adhere to, and just keep doing it. Rinse and repeat. Make it your habit. You got to have a routine. Like success routines are everything. Like that is where your success is found. It's found in consistency.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Carnivore Revolution. Today I have with me a friend. We've been talking for probably a year and a half, close to 2 years on Instagram, and this is our first face-to-face meeting. I'm super excited to be joined by Little Bit of Fit, Katie Kelly, and we're going to talk some carnivore stuff, and we're both in our bathing suits. It must be summertime. So I know. Katie's going to the pool. I'm going to my daughter's. We're going to hang out in the sun today. Both of us get our vitamin D, right?
Right.
Definitely not something to fear or be afraid of, the sun.
No, you feel so much better when you get outside. I tell people that get outside as much as you can.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk to you today about your story for people who don't know who you are, how you got started with this way of eating. You have such a great balance of the way that you handle, the carnivore step and the not 100% carnivore step. So I want to touch on that later too. But let's just talk about your story and how you became a carnivore and what it's done for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my unique story, I have Crohn's disease for people who don't know me. So it's an inflammatory bowel disease, autoimmune condition. So along my fitness journey, I have lost 55 pounds and I put my Crohn's and I had bulimia too. So I grew up with eating disorders. I know especially a lot of people in the carnivore space can relate to that. Put those in med-free remission. So like no longer have any problems with like the bulimia or the binge eating and I really haven't had a really bad Crohn's flare in the 4+ years that I've been carnivore. I really hate using labels because like you said, I kind of incorporate some white rice products on occasion into my diet too. I like to say I'm a liberal carnivore, like just meat-based with my diet. And I try to preach that to everybody out there too. Like you can do whatever shade of a meat-based diet that you want. Like there's no reason to pigeonhole yourself into a specific label. You just got to do what works for you. So over my fitness journey, I've had weight loss. I've, improved my relationship with food, body image, like the whole bit. And I really contribute that to lifting weights and a meat-based lifestyle. I have had such better life quality and so much better, just like self-love and just evolution as a person since going this way. And I just really couldn't be grateful enough. So it's exciting to be able to share this story with people like you and other people that have had success and just say, hey, there's a solution. Like if you guys have problems like we do, there's no reason to feel hopeless and you can experiment and do any kind of diet that you want as long as it makes you feel your best. So in a nutshell, that's me. Used to be a competitive CrossFit athlete. I still do CrossFit. I love it. I modify everything to my specifications. I'm not the competitive CrossFit athlete that I used to be, I'll be 41 here in a few weeks. So have learned to give my body some grace and learn from my mistakes over the years and like overtraining. So I guess that's kind of my unique story and I'm just excited to share that with everybody today.
Yeah. And I love how with your content, you mix it up like on Instagram and on YouTube, you mix up like it's not all carnivore stuff for you. A lot of it is mindset and helping people. And if you messed up this week, here's what you should do. And I just love how you kind of spread that all around. I just think that works really well. And I also was bulimic. I just turned 50 last week.
Woo-hoo.
And yeah, I know. And for me, it was, like 37 years of eating disorders, not just bulimia, because that stopped a long time ago. But even once that stopped, I still continued to binge. But then instead of purging, I would punish myself, by not eating or juice fasting or eating only raw vegetables for a week because I had, like 10 cupcakes or something. And so I think that resonates with a lot of people too, the idea that the eating disorder thing. And that's something that doesn't get talked about as much. We talk about binge eating a lot with carnivore and how it can help with that, but we don't talk about like the root of eating disorders, 30-year eating disorders that carnivore can help, but it does. It's just amazing.
It does. I did a video about that. This has been probably a couple years ago, about what carnivore, since, we're talking about that diet, what it doesn't heal. And if you don't touch on those root issues, and that's what I really try to coach, like with my clients and other people on social media, is like, if you don't figure out why you're having these habits and these tendencies, it really doesn't matter what diet you do. There's always going to be that occasion, for triggers and like those habits to continue. I have a sports nutrition background, so I've been in this space for a really long time, been a nutritionist for a long time, and worked with all different kinds of people. And it's not like you don't need to demonize one macro. There's not one way to do it. So that's kind of why I like to share all different kinds of things, because, life really encompasses so many levels. You got your body, your mind, your spirit, like the whole bit. So, again, it doesn't matter what diet you do if you don't figure out like why you're doing it, why you're beating yourself up. Carnivore is not going to solve that for you.
Yeah, and let me tell you, so when I first started carnivore, I had eaten like 20 cupcakes in 36 hours for my birthday, for my 48th birthday, and I woke up on Monday morning and I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And you were one of the very first people I found. I found Kelly Hogan, of course, the Joe Rogan podcast with Sean Baker, which is how most people get started in carnivore.
Yep, same here.
I know. So I found many, many things. You were one of the first people I found, and it took me about 6 months. And around that time, I had been gaining weight, and I couldn't figure out why. I wasn't eating enough. I didn't know it at the time. I was fasting too much. And then I saw one of your posts about the difference between a moderator and an abstainer. And I was down here in my basement, and I just started crying, because for me, that was my light bulb moment. So I had stuck with it for 6 months, even though it wasn't working the way I wanted it to. I was gaining weight. I was going backwards, but I felt good. So that was a really hard place to be. But when I saw your post about that, it just, like so much pressure came off of me at that moment, that I realized I'm not weird. I'm not messed up. This is a thing. There's a reason that I eat 20 cupcakes, or that I've never eaten one Oreo cookie. Who eats one Oreo cookie? But I guess there are people that do that. So there's a reason for that. And it was like all of a sudden, all of this pressure just drained from me when I realized I'm not as messed up as I thought. At almost 50 years old, I wasn't as messed up as I thought. But that information was key for me in getting me to where I am now, having lost the weight, having gained the confidence, and being empowered and encouraged, and being out here helping other people, is knowing that difference. So do you want to explain that in your words real quick, the difference between an abstainer and a moderator? Because I think that's huge for people.
It's huge. And it really all comes down to self-awareness. It's self-awareness. You're not weird. Like you and I, we've had similar issues. You guys are not alone. So utilize your network and your community, and like, we're all here to help each other do better. So an abstainer versus a moderator. And I always thought there was something wrong with me too, until I really sat down and I'm like, okay, I know I have this specific food group right here that I know I have issues with. Like when I have one, it's like a drug, and I had read somewhere. So the book Brain Over Binge really helped me. It's your body's trying to survive. So when you have this restrictive mindset, and you're starving yourself basically all the time, and overly fasting can do this too. It's your body trying to survive. So that's why we have those binge tendencies. But we have these specific food groups, they're like drugs. So we relate these to like an alcoholic. You don't tell an alcoholic, oh, you can just have one drink, like it's cool. Okay, well, sugar and like Oreos and cereal and things like that, they're drugs to me. Sugar is like a drug to me. So if I have one cupcake, I'm just like you. I want the whole thing. I'm going to eat it too if I have one. And I'm confident now that I can tell people, like food pushers, I'm always like, thank you so much. But, thank you so much, but I eat this way just because it serves me the best. And you just got to have confidence about that. So like I describe being an abstainer as kind of like an alcoholic or like a drug addict. Okay. So you have your foods that you have issues with trying to moderate. Some of us, can eventually moderate certain things. So moderators are ones that can have like one Oreo and they're like, okay, I'm satisfied. Like it's not a continuous drug for you. Sugar's not like a gateway drug. So for me, like social alcohol, which I don't drink a whole lot anymore. Like I may have one cocktail or sip on things, maybe like I'm going to the pool, I may have a few sips here and there. I can moderate that fine. And that doesn't trigger me to go down the rabbit hole of wanting to binge eat or anything like that. Not everybody can do that. Or some people may be okay with like sweet potatoes, as a carbohydrate, because most people have problems with carbohydrates. They may be able to eat like a sweet potato, but if you have a chip or like a French fry or like a different version of that, then it triggers you to go down the rabbit hole. So it's just self-awareness on, here are my safe foods, the ones that I know that I have control over. And then here are the ones that I have issues with. So you have to set hard boundaries with yourself. I know that if I have XYZ, these things, those are gateway drugs for me. So that's a no. So that's giving me power. That's giving me my energy back. That's food freedom to me, to know that I know the difference. So people think that carnivore is restrictive or vegan or whatever diet you choose. They think that it is restricting you, but that's true food freedom for me because I no longer fear food. I know I can eat whatever animal-based products I want and I'm safe. My body is safe. It knows what to do with those foods. And I can eat not like binge eat like as much as I want, but I can eat until I'm satiated and satisfied. Whereas if I'm eating, like, even if I cook a big thing of white rice, it's a trigger for me. I will still want to eat that whole thing because it's just like a drug for me. But other things like rice cakes, I know exactly what's in those, and those are my carbohydrate of choice. Like say I have a hard CrossFit workout and I feel like I'm very intuitively led. So I can feel when I may need a few carbohydrates, but I'm not eating like 300 grams of carbs. I'm literally eating like 5 rice cakes or something like that. I can moderate those. So really it all comes down to self-awareness, like knowing what your triggers are and what isn't.
Yeah. Do you ever have times as a former bulimic and binge eater where you go places like where you used to go and it would stress you out, right? Like we went to a theme park recently where I vividly remember being there and eating like with 2 hands kettle corn, the sweet popcorn and the cinnamon bread we used to get there. Like, and I can vividly remember what that was like for me. I would be stressed out all day long. It was all about the food. I wanted more. It was like this special thing. And we went recently and the calm that I felt knowing, but I always remember those issues that I had. It's really interesting that it can bring back, you go places that like people would call it like nostalgic, like you go places and you remember other times, but for me, it's not nostalgic. It's like this weight, has now been lifted for me when I go to those places because I remember the way I used to want to binge when we were there. And there's just like this peace now. Do you feel like that sometimes when you go places and when you have those memories?
Well, I just went to the movies recently, and you smell the popcorn, like when you go in and, there's all the candies and stuff. And before, like you, because like with social things, and especially with me and my Crohn's disease, I always had to eat a specific way. I would get anxiety because I'm like, am I going to be tempted? Like, I know if I have a handful of popcorn, I'm going to eat the whole thing, then I'm going to be sick. And it's like taking your power back. Like when you go in, and I always make sure like I've eaten before I go. I'm not hungry when I go places, and being an abstainer from certain things like that. It's a yes, no, like it is black and white for me. As most of us, like we just know that food doesn't serve us to our best ability, mentally, physically, emotionally, the whole bit. So it's not a stress anymore because you have confidence in yourself. You know what to do in that moment. Like you don't even question it. You are your new person because you've learned from those mistakes. And people are like, well, how long is it going to take? And what's the answer for me? And you really have to experiment with everything, food choices, meal timing, macros, like workouts. You just have to figure out what you love, what you can be consistent with and adhere to, and just keep doing it. Rinse and repeat, make it your habit. You got to have a routine. Like success routines are everything. Like that is where your success is found. It's found in consistency. People just don't have the patience and they don't want to take the time to like find their foundation. Like if things aren't working, track your food, like just from a tool standpoint, self-awareness, everything's self-awareness. And you don't have to do it forever, but you have to get honest with yourself on what's going on, what is not working, where do I need to adjust.
Yeah,
So,
hearing that information from you is actually what made me start tracking after, I think it had been about 8 months of me trying without tracking, because everybody says, don't track, eat when you're hungry until full. But that didn't work for me because I didn't know when I was hungry and when I was full from so many years of chronic under eating and dieting, and then, having eating disorders and all of that. I didn't know. And so your information is actually what made me start tracking and help me figure out what I needed to do, which takes us to our next question. So I wanted to talk about like macros and high fat versus not low fat, because any kind of carnivore typically is going to be high fat unless you're doing PSFM, which I don't usually recommend. So so I just wanted to talk about like that issue just for a minute.
yeah, absolutely. And again, it all goes back. And I figured out what worked for me through experimentation. Some people, high fat carnivore works really, really well. But again, it goes back to self-awareness. What are your fitness goals? Where's your current health status? Okay, so for me, figuring out why high fat didn't work for me, I'm a performance athlete. I still work out. I lift weights every day. I'm very active. I don't have a gallbladder. Okay, so I had my gallbladder removed back in 2013. So that hinders my ability to digest and absorb fats as efficiently as someone with a well-working gallbladder. Okay, so I have some malabsorption there, along with like my Crohn's disease. I noticed that when my meals were super high in fat and I did that consistently over several days, my digestion was horrible. Horrible. I had gastric reflux. Like I literally felt like my bowels just stopped. And I would start putting on weight quickly. And I'm like, all right, I'm having some absorption problems, some digestive problems. So the higher protein approach works for me. And literally it just comes via experimentation. Now, I'm more intuitively led now. I can do some fat cycling. Like I honor my body. If I'm craving a lot of fat, I eat higher fat meats. I let my fat macros go up. Protein stays about consistent. On the days that I'm craving leaner meats, I let myself have lower fat and leaner meats. And I may consume a little lower calories on those days. Simply because you choose lower fat meats, you're going to cut your calories. So it all comes down to figuring out, where do you feel your best? Where do you feel your best? And then you just got to be consistent, like rinse and repeat, like experiment. If high fat isn't working for you, then lower it a little bit and just kind of see like where your sweet spot is. Like you're not making mistakes. Like there is nothing that you can't go back to doing. If something doesn't work, go back to what you were doing. People are so afraid of like figuring out something doesn't work, like they're the worst person in the world if something fails. And it's like, that's how you figure out what works. Like, it's okay. You need to make mistakes. That's how you figure out what serves you best.
Yeah, I feel like we're our own like science experiments. And like you said, people seem to be afraid to try different things. I talk to a lot of people, women mostly, who are under eating because they're so afraid of eating. I don't know where that number 1,200 calories comes from, but it's like, I know everybody wants to eat 1,200 calories, and I would much rather eat 2,000 calories and be able to lose weight or maintain my weight than eat 1,200 calories and be stuck, and just not feel as good. People really don't think about the fact that what we eat is our energy. That's our fuel source.
And I just had a client call yesterday with a lady who had been consuming, the typical like maybe 1,300 calories. She was a runner, anywhere from 1,300 to like 1,500. And I'm like, do you understand what you really should be eating? It all comes down to really like a scientific, physiological, like, do you understand how your body works and how much energy you're expending by doing all of these runs? And they're like, well, my fitness pal said to lose weight that I need to be eating like around 1,300. I go, but my fitness pal doesn't know you're a human that's been living off of 1,200 calories for an extended period of time, and you're a performance athlete. Like you're running. My fitness pal doesn't know that. And that's why you need to work with a coach or someone that understands to help you figure out. Sometimes you just need yes, no guidance. Like, hey, try this. Here's your permission if you're scared to. And she's like, no, I don't really know. I was like, okay, well, let's walk through the TDEE calculator. So she punched it in, and her maintenance calories were like 2,100. She goes, oh my God, am I really supposed to be eating that much? I go, yes, girl. Like I maintain my weight off of about 2,000 plus or minus a day. And she's like, really? And I go, yeah. Now it took me several years to get there, but you have to have faith and trust in your body. The thing is, you have to feel safe and you have to trust your body. And we don't. And when you are emotionally holding yourself back that way, it's really hard for your body to relax and do like what it's supposed to do. And that takes fueling appropriately. So like living off of this, chicken breasts every freaking day and this bro diet mindset that we think that we have to follow. It's like, if you're doing carnivore, like you can't be afraid of fat. Like you can play with your protein and your fat macros, but you got to eat food. And if you're cutting carbs out, that comes via your fats primarily. So just not fearing that number and not being afraid to eat.
Yeah, I talked to somebody the other day who eats almost no fat, like literally as low fat as she could possibly get, zero red meat, only chicken breast for protein, and then beans and stuff like that. And even the chicken breast is not very often. And she told me she thought that she might die if she had to add fat in. Like she really, and not even necessarily does she think the fat's going to kill her. She thinks she might kill herself. She doesn't think she could eat any fat. And so she, mentally needs the help too, and needs that fat. But the idea to people that are so scared of fats that also aren't exactly mentally healthy because of different issues they have, but the two go hand in hand. The fat is so important for our mental health, but yet you can't get them to eat the fat to try to get better because they're so afraid of it. That's so hard.
And I find like education, so like going back to, like the science of it, like, hey, do you know fats are precursors to our hormones and you're not eating fat? Hello. Like just by doing that is probably going to solve the majority of your problems if you raise your calories up with nutrient dense foods that serve you the best, whether it's vegetables, whatever, meat, I still think is best, but I'm a little biased. If you just simply raise that up, like you're going to feel like a new person if you just start trusting yourself and feeding your body what it needs.
Also, she eats 800 calories a day and exercise. She swims miles in the pool every day.
Gosh. And I know, I just say, hey, I eat more than that in one meal.
Yeah, right. I know, it's just, and it's so hard for people to understand though, because we're supposed to eat the rainbow. We're supposed to eat all of these fruits and vegetables that have almost no calories in them and no fat. And then we're supposed to substitute when we need fat with some sort of vegetable oil, and we're not supposed to eat red meat. And that's so hard for people. I mean, I remember I was there. I know you were too. Egg white omelets with fat-free cheese, right? It's so gross.
And rice cakes every day. And I was not feeding my body like anything. So I get it. And taking the emotion out of it, whether it's weighing yourself on the scale or being emotionally tied to feeling stressed out about tracking food or stressed out about eating fat or whatever. If you say, okay, this is how our body works, like we're taking the emotion out of it. Okay, we're going to set that aside for a minute. Like, this is how we function as a human being. This is how our hormones are created. We need fat to do X, Y, Z. Like sometimes if you reframe it like that, like we're machines. So this is how we're going to make our machine work. They're like, oh, okay. So just trust the process and just say, hey, if it doesn't work, go back to where you feel safe. Start over again. Right. It's never going to be a failure. It's just a lesson that you learned. Right. So really it all comes down to feeling safe and trusting in that process and just understand yourself and understand how your body works. That's how you figure out how it works.
Yeah. And so a lot of times the mental benefits, the mental health benefits come way before any healing in your body that's visible. And sometimes that includes some weight gain, but by golly, it is so worth it to have that mental strength and that mental stability that we get from eating lots of fatty meats.
Yep. 100%. Like I know that I function better. I feel that I look better, feel better at almost 41 years old than I ever did at 20. Like, I mean, people think I'm like 25 all the time. And I'm like, because I'll have patients. They'll be like, oh, did you just graduate from school? And I was like, I've been doing this for 18 years. And they're like, what? I was like, it's all the meat, y'all. It's all the meat and being out in the sun and like just living a very self-loving life and being active. I go, that's all it comes down to. I mean, I see patients in their 30s that aren't mobile and hurt and can't move and and it's hard for me to refrain from being like, hey, so what's your diet? Like, let's, because I have to segregate that. I can't overstep my bounds when I'm, working in the medical field. But 9 times out of 10, you know, like they'll start talking about it, and most of them are eating processed diet foods. They're not eating enough. They're eating out all the time. And they're like, oh, so what do you do? And I'm like, let me tell you what I do. And they're like, you're serious? You eat meat and eggs and you eat that much? And I was like, yeah, and it'll change your life. I dare you. I dare you to try it for
Yes.
30 days and then tell me how you feel. Life
Yeah,
changer.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And people, when somebody compliments me, like whether it's online or in person, they'll say, wow, you look great. I say, thanks, it's the beef. You know, and I'm just
I
like,
know,
I don't
was
have
like hashtag body by beef. And my dad, like, I grew up on a farm. I'm a cattle farmer's daughter. So
Yeah.
I always laugh. I'm like, my dad would disown me if I said I was a vegan. Like, nothing against vegans or eating vegetables or anything. But I was like, I grew up on meat, and that's kind of how I discovered how, when I went low carb with my diet, when I was doing every diet in the freaking world, I was like, I always felt best when I did a lower carb approach and I ate primarily meat. So I was like, And then I discovered Kelly Hogan and like all the people just like you. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. I was like, I'm going to do this. This was right around COVID time, and I'm going to commit to it. And best thing I ever did for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then I want to thank you wholeheartedly for meat bars. For those of you that don't know, Katie is the reason we have meat bars. And I mention you a lot when I make videos with the meat bars, but I eat meat bars 5 or 6 times a week. So I want to talk about, and then we just have a few more questions. I want to talk about how you incorporate your food into work. So meat bars, for you guys who don't know, are ground beef. You break up into chunks. It sounds so simple, and you put it in your air fryer and you cook it for like 12 minutes. And it's perfect.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy, so easy. And if you can use parchment paper in your air fryer, there's no cleanup. I mean, it's like super easy. One of the easiest meals you will ever make. You can use any kind of ground beef or ground turkey or ground chicken. So how do you incorporate your food in with your work day? I know, you work a full-time job and your
I work variable hours. So I typically stick to about 2 meals a day. I'll throw in occasional OMAD, like if I can sleep in, I'm an early bird. Or if I'm just not as hungry, not as busy, I can fast for long periods of time now that I've been doing this 4+ years. It's not forced. It's just, I just listen to my body. But I typically eat about 2 meals a day. So like I eat super early after my workouts in the morning. I eat my largest meal there, and I taper my meals off as I go. So my second meal is always a little bit smaller. It's just how my digestion is best. And I fast overnight, usually at least, I would say anywhere from 14 to 18 hours, I'll fast overnight. But I have an air fryer that I take with me. So when I travel road trips, I just take an air fryer with me. And I use it at work. I just put it in our break room, and I'll either eat food at my place before I go to work and then save a little baggie for my second meal. You can reheat it in the air fryer if you want. I don't use the microwave a lot. So a lot of times I'll just eat them cold, or I'll just fix like the second half of them at work in my air fryer. Like, it's so easy. But the big mistake that I did make when I discovered those was I wasn't consuming the fat like in the bottom. So I was actually under eating, because meat will cook up a lot leaner if you're not consuming the fat in the bottom of your pan, or your air fryer. So just, a little tip there. We don't realize that. So use fattier cuts of meat if you can, because it does cook up a little bit leaner. You can save that fat too to use for like future meals. I just put it in a little glass container like I do my bacon fat, and I can use it as a dip, or I can dump it on leaner meat, like if I have that. But yeah, just a lifesaver. Like, you can save them for later. People are like, does the oven give the same effect? I'm like, no, like you really got to use an air fryer if you want the crispy exterior, and just play around with times and temps, because they're all different. Some of us don't like them cooked as crispy. I'm a texture person. So I like mine crispy on the outside. You can break them up into nuggets, into bars, whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I do that. I vary it. Like, people will ask me, because like I'm on the lion diet for the month of June again. I did the lion diet in January, and people say, how do you keep things fresh? Because I would get so bored. And there was a point, I think it was like day 8 last time I did lion diet, where I made some meat bars and I went to go put it in my mouth. And like, I thought, there's no way this is going down. Like, it was just, because that was pretty much all I had eaten for like 8 days. So then we grilled some burgers, and I was able to eat those for a few days. And then I went back to meat bars, and it was fine. But I think it was just that aversion from having the same thing over and over again. Yeah. So what I do now is I do different sizes each time I make them, because it really does change it. Because like you said, you're a texture person. And so sometimes it's crispier on the outside. Sometimes it's not as done on the inside, depending on how big they are. And that can really make a difference on how you feel when you eat them, because you don't get bored as much. Sometimes I'll take half of them out, put the other half back in and let them cook for a few minutes longer. So in that same meal, I get different textures. It's really just a great idea.
And
so great.
That's great. I did a post on that too. So yeah, you can just switch up your meat variety, seasonings if you use seasonings, sauces if you use seasonings, and different, cooking methods. Just like you said, cook in a skillet one time, or then maybe nuke it, or not really nuke it, but throw it in your air fryer so the outside's crispy. Just have fun with it. Like everyone's like so scared of like meal prep. I'm like, just play with it. You'll figure out what you like.
Yeah. Just put some meat in the oven or the air fryer and you're good. It doesn't have to be complicated in the beginning. While you're figuring it out.
It's that simple. It is that simple. People freak out about it. I'm like, no, eggs and meat, just switch up the way you cook it. Not hard.
That's right. It's not hard at all. So now if you had one piece of advice for somebody who is just getting started or wants to start or is like just finding us now and they're like, I don't even understand what this is. Like, what's the one piece of advice you would give to somebody who wants to get started or needs to try something different for health purposes? What would you say?
Have patience, number one, because the adaptation period takes a lot longer than you think. It really took me about a whole year to really figure things out, nail down food choices, cooking, methods like macros, things like that, where I felt my best. It really took about a year. So really commit to it. It's not a 2-week quick fix. So have patience, number one. Just pick the meats and the animal products you like. Okay. You'll figure out what works for you and what doesn't. So just cut out the junk, cut out the triggers. Like, don't make it complicated. Just pick what you like and track your food just for educational purposes. Just so you know where your foundation is, it'll make adjustments 100 times easier for you, because then you can figure out like, oh, when my protein is up around 200, that's too much for me. I don't feel good. Okay, so you have that black and white number right there. So you know to lower it down and raise your fat a little bit. Like, it really is that simple. You just need some education. So I would say patience, just pick the good nourishing foods you like and track your food just for data purposes. You don't have to weigh yourself on the scale. Like, don't worry about that. Really focus on how you feel, feeling healthy, your digestion's good, your biofeedback, your sleep is good, and just nail that routine. Because if you have a good success routine, like, things will be 100 times easier. So those are the biggest pieces of advice I would give someone just starting.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Katie. This was really great. We'll have to do it again sometime and talk about all different kinds of stuff. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And I'll put all of your links in the description box. Thank you for joining us. Come back next time on the Carnivore Revolution.